Hi, I'm so glad that you stayed around to hear another story. As you can see, Moon is asleep or resting very near to the tree and where we're reading our story, so hopefully she will stay. This is called The Church Mice at Christmas, and it was gifted to me by my Auntie Shirley in the Christmas of '82. And I must warn you, it's a bit of a strange one, and I found it a little frightening as a child. So, yeah, just to say, there are some memorable characters in here, but it's a good story. One morning, a few days before Christmas, Arthur and Humphrey, the leaders of the church mice, were in the porch admiring the Christmas tree. "It would be jolly nice to have a party," said Arthur suddenly. "A real Christmas party, with paper hats and crackers and games and things." "Oh, yes," said Humphrey, "and mince pies and trifle and custard and blancmange and cream and jelly." So it was all settled. The first thing they had to do was to think of a way of earning some money, because parties can be expensive. That puzzled them, until Arthur happened to glance at the notice board. "That's it," he cried. "We'll raffle something." They were just trying to think what the something could be when Samson, the church cat, appeared. The mice looked at him, and then they looked at each other and smiled. They made quite sure that they stood well out of Samson's reach when they told him they had decided to raffle him. But in the end, they managed to convince him they were doing him a favor, really, because whoever won him would certainly be a cat lover and treat him with great respect and take him to a lovely home and give him an enormous dinner. And anyway, he could come back to the vestry as soon as he liked. So they went ahead with the raffle at once. And soon the day of the draw arrived. It went very well, and everything happened exactly as Arthur and Humphrey had predicted. Well, maybe not exactly. But Samson was fairly philosophical about it. "After all," he said, as he slunk back to the vestry an hour or so later, "any cat that's stupid enough to take a vow never to harm mice deserves what he gets." When he arrived, the mice were still discussing how best to spend the raffle money. Later that evening, however, the raffle winners discovered that their prize had run away. But they weren't too worried because they knew where they would find him, roughly, and Humphrey showed them precisely. He said he was sorry that the prize hadn't given them satisfaction, and although he couldn't, under any circumstances, refund their ticket money, he was able to offer them the vestry dustpan instead, which was much better value than a mere cat, even if the handle was missing. But the couple preferred Samson. They tried to wheedle him out with winning smiles and honeyed words, but Samson wouldn't be wheedled. So eventually, despite what Humphrey had said about not giving refunds, they took their money and went home. The mice were really depressed about this because without the money, there would be no party. Humphrey muttered that though it wasn't in his nature to criticize, there was a certain whiskery ginger individual who would do well to look up the word selfish in the dictionary. But he didn't say it loud enough for Samson to hear. cheer themselves up, Arthur and Humphrey decided to go across to the vicarage to watch television. On the way, they racked their brains to think of another way to make some money, but without success. Later on, however, they saw something which sparked an idea. And the next day, they rounded up the mice with the loudest voices. They spent the whole morning practicing their scales and the whole afternoon sorting out the pronunciation of Wenceslas. And by the time it was dark, they were ready. Carol singing had seemed a really good plan in the vestry. But as Humphrey said afterwards, everybody knows that the best laid schemes o' mice and thingagummies gank lefty. And those who didn't were learning fast. Arthur and Humphrey fled through a shop door. And inside they tried a rather clever ruse. It would have worked too if a customer hadn't thought they would make such lovely little stocking fillers. From then on, it was one thing after another. Fortunately, Arthur kept his head. And managed to get them aboard a passing train. Humphrey complained that they should have inquired where it was going first, but Arthur said they would find out soon enough. They never did. But just when it looked as if they had come to the end, Arthur spotted the very thing for a quick getaway. Although it turned out to be a pretty close run thing, once outside, the mice all met up again and managed to slip away unnoticed into the crowd. The journey back to the vestry was dreadful. Everyone was gloomy because of the failure of the expedition, and it didn't help matters to have to listen to Humphrey explaining his new theory about how Christmas Day should change places with August bank holiday so that people wouldn't have to tramp through the snow to do their Christmas shopping. It took ages for them to get their wind back, but when they had, Arthur announced that since they hadn't made a single penny out in their carol singing, that there wouldn't be a party after all. At this, the mice looked so miserable that Arthur, after a few moments' thought, told them they should cheer up because he still had a very pleasant surprise in store for them. After that, he and Humphrey whispered together for a long time. Then, as quietly as possible, they filled a paper bag with odds and ends from the choir boys' lockers, woke Samson, and tiptoed out of the vestry while nobody was looking. Outside, Arthur assured them that they would find whatever else they needed in the parson's garden shed. On the way back to the vestry, a most wonderful thing happened to them. Even Humphrey was speechless for 2 seconds. Then he said, "Good evening, Father Christmas, sir. I am Humphrey, and what I want for Christmas is a quadraphonic record player, a quartz watch, 4 ounces of jelly babies, a pair of 2-tone football boots. And what I would like," began Arthur. "Transistor radio," continued Humphrey, "a dozen walnut whips." The Beano Annual, a yo-yo, 2 pounds of fudge, an electric guitar. And what I would like," began Arthur. "Color television," Humphrey continued, 6 boxes of cheese spread, a cuckoo clock, a pocket calculator, and a packet of custard creams. "And what I," began Arthur. "Well, that will do for now," said Humphrey, "because the sergeant is obviously in a hurry to give you his list. So if your worship will just make a note of my address," and he shouted it out very slowly so that there could be no mistake. "Right then," he finished. "We'll expect your highness at 9 o'clock tonight sharp. Carry on, sergeant." They decided they might as well go on pretending to be Father Christmas, even though the real one was now going to visit them, because it would amuse the other mice and fill up time until he arrived. Unfortunately, it wasn't the mice who seemed to find them amusing. So the return to the vestry was anything but the pleasant surprise that Arthur had promised. Though they made up for it by telling the mice about their meeting with Father Christmas and explaining that he would be coming to the vestry at 9 o'clock. Everyone started to get ready at once. Meanwhile, a reward for the persons who had helped to capture the burglar had arrived at Wortlethorpe police station, and the sergeant, who had heard Humphrey shouting out his address, promised to deliver it himself. Back in the vestry, it wasn't long before everything was spick and span, and by the time the church clock struck 9, the mice were ready and waiting. At the same moment, in Wortlethorpe police station, the sergeant was struck with a brilliant idea. If great detectives can wear disguises to catch villains, he thought to himself, why can't I? So he borrowed the burglar's Father Christmas outfit, and when he looked in the mirror, he scarcely recognized himself. "It's a stroke of genius," he muttered. "I'll be a chief inspector before you can say Sherlock Holmes." In the vestry, the mice heard the clock strike 9:15, and Arthur and Humphrey started to get worried. At the police station, the sergeant was just setting off on his rounds, and as he had to pass the church, he decided to deliver the mice's reward. When the clock struck 9:30, Arthur and Humphrey began to fear for their safety. Humphrey started to stammer that Father Christmas was probably having trouble with his reindeer or something, but the mice were in no mood for excuses. and by 9:45, the mood in the vestry was very ugly indeed. Samson was about to step in and do something about it when suddenly the door creaked open, and for a long time after Father Christmas had gone, the mice just sat and stared, murmuring things like, "Gosh," "Golly," and "Crumbs." Then with shrieks of excitement, they all rushed to see what he had brought them. What they saw was everything that anybody could possibly want for a Christmas party. And what a party they had! It was good enough to make Humphrey forget about all the quadraphonic record players and yo-yos and things. In fact, it was so good that they were all ill for 3 days after. And then, when it was over, there was enough left for the choir boys to have a party of their own, and for them to be ill for 3 days as well. Even after that, the mice were still able to find a box of crystallized fruits, a tin of asparagus, and a jar of pickled walnuts. And since it was the season of goodwill to all men, they decided to give those to the parson. But then Humphrey informed them that years and years of intense scientific research had proved conclusively that parsons don't like crystallized fruits. So they kept those and had a feast on New Year's Eve, just to round the year off nicely. Let's do Hickory Dickory Dock. And I hope that that wasn't too frightening for you, but what a good story. Aren't those mice amazing? And that's Samson. Shout out to all the cats and all the mice and all the creatures and everyone who is up at night. May they stay safe. May they make good choices, and may they be cozy as this one. Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck 1, bong. The mouse ran down. Hickory dickory dock. Merry Christmas, and we have one more story to go.